Every spring, gardeners lose entire beds to one cold night. The Amish never do, and this is exactly what they bury. I remember standing at the edge of my garden on a morning in late April, maybe 15 years ago now, looking at a row of tomato transplants I'd been nursing since February. They were black, not wilted, black. The kind of damage that tells you the cell walls ruptured overnight and there's nothing left to save. The forecast had said 34 degrees. I thought 34 was fine. I thought I understood cold. I didn't understand cold at all. That same week, I drove past a property about 4 miles from mine. Old Amish farm, big kitchen garden running along the south side of the house, and I slowed down because something looked wrong, or rather something looked too right. Their plants were standing, green, upright, completely unmarked. Same night, same county, same forecast. I pulled over and I sat there for a moment just trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Their beds were uncovered. No row cover, no plastic, no hoop houses, nothing I recognized. Just soil and plants and a morning that had already claimed everything I'd worked on for 2 months. That was the moment I started asking questions. It took me a while to get answers, because the people who know this method don't think of it as a method. They think of it as just how you do things. The kind of knowledge that gets passed down at the elbow, not written in books, not filmed, not posted anywhere. But over the seasons, by paying attention and asking the right questions slowly, I got enough pieces together to understand what was actually happening in that soil. And once I understood it, I couldn't believe I'd been doing it any other way. Here's the thing about frost damage that most gardeners have backwards. We think of frost as a temperature problem, like the air gets cold enough and the plant freezes. And that's partially true. But the plant isn't living in the air, it's living in the soil. Its roots are the engine of everything happening above ground, and if you protect the root environment, if you keep that zone stable through the night, the plant above can often survive temperature swings that would kill a container-grown version of the same species. The air can drop. The plant can handle the air. What it can't handle is its own root system going cold and losing the ability to move water and nutrients at the moment the leaves need them most. Frost damage, a lot of the time, isn't freezing, it's dehydration. The plant can't drink fast enough when the machinery in the roots slows down, and the tissue dies because it dried out, not just because it froze. The Amish understood this long before the science existed to explain it. They weren't thinking in terms of cellular biology. They were thinking in terms of what they'd seen work across generations. And what they'd seen work involved the soil holding heat through the night, not the air, not a cover, not a barrier between the plant and the cold. The soil itself, the ground as a thermal battery. And the way you charge that battery is with what you bury the night before a hard freeze. What they bury is organic material. Specifically, freshly wetted organic material packed into the bed in the hours before the temperature drops. The most traditional version uses straw. Not dry straw scattered on top as mulch, but straw that has been soaked in water and worked into the top 2 to 3 inches of soil around the base of each plant. Not on top of the plant, not draped over anything, worked into the soil at the root zone. The wet straw acts as a heat sink. Water holds thermal energy at roughly 4 times the rate of dry soil. When you pack saturated organic material into the root zone and then let the night drop around it, the water in that material releases heat gradually, for hours, into the exact few inches of earth where the plant's feeder roots are operating. The soil temperature doesn't crash, it bleeds off warmth slowly. And by the time the water has given up most of its stored heat, the sun is usually close enough to the horizon to start the recovery. That's the core of it. But there's a timing element that matters as much as the material itself, and this is where most people go wrong even when they know the basic idea. You can't do this the morning of a predicted frost. You can't do it right before sundown and expect full effect. The window is the afternoon, ideally between 2 and 4 hours before temperatures start their real drop, which for most hard frosts means you're working in the mid-afternoon while it still feels fine outside. That's the counterintuitive part. You're out there in 50-degree sunshine, hands in the dirt, and it feels ridiculous. But if you wait until it feels urgent, you've already missed the window where the water has time to transfer its warmth into the surrounding soil matrix before the cold front arrives. The physics here are non-negotiable. Heat transfer through soil takes time. You're not insulating, you're preloading. I want to walk through the exact steps because the details matter more than people expect when they first hear about this. You start by soaking your straw, or wood shavings, or leaf mold, whatever your Amish neighbors would have had on hand because they don't go buy something special for this. Whatever organic bedding material you have on the property. Fill a bucket or a wheelbarrow. Let it sit in water long enough that the material is saturated all the way through, not just surface wet. This usually takes about 20 to 30 minutes for straw, a little less for fine material like wood shavings. You want it heavy. You want water squeezing out when you grab a handful. That weight is thermal mass. That's what you're actually working with. Then you go to each plant and you work a generous layer of this saturated material into the soil around the root zone. Not a thin sprinkle, a real layer, 4 to 6 inches deep if your plant spacing allows it. Push it in with your hands or a small hand tool. You're not burying the crown of the plant or covering the stem. You're packing the material into the bed itself, from about 2 inches away from the stem, outward to the drip line of the plant, which for most young transplants is only 8 to 10 inches of radius. You're essentially surrounding the root system with a ring of saturated thermal mass. When you're done, the bed looks a little strange, dark, wet, dense around each plant. But you won't be embarrassed in the morning. Here's why this works on a deeper level than just insulation. The process of water releasing stored heat into cooler surroundings is called latent heat exchange, and it's the same principle that makes coastal climates milder than inland ones. Large bodies of water don't swing temperature the way dry land does because they're releasing and absorbing enormous amounts of thermal energy. You're doing a miniature version of this at root scale. You're creating a small, localized climate in the 6 inches of earth that matter most. The Amish didn't call it that. They would have said the wet hay keeps the ground from going cold. Same thing, different language. And they were right in a way that decades of gardening books with all their advice about frost cloth and cold frames and row cover somehow failed to capture. Now, I want to be straight with you about when this method has limits. A sustained freeze, multiple nights in a row below 28 degrees, will eventually overwhelm any passive thermal protection. You're not building a greenhouse. You're buying the plant a night, maybe 2. For the light frosts and unexpected cold snaps that kill most spring gardens, the 29 to 34 degree events that show up on the forecast after 3 weeks of warm weather, this is more than enough. That's where Amish gardens survive nights that take everything else on the street. They're not doing something miraculous. They're managing the soil temperature through the most common and most lethal frost window. That's it. But that window is where most losses happen, and winning there means most of your season is protected. The mistakes I see most often when people try this for the first time are worth going through because I made every one of them. Mistake 1 is using dry material. I know it sounds obvious now, but the first time I tried something close to this, I had dry straw on hand, and I figured it'd be fine. The insulation would still work. It doesn't. Dry straw insulates the soil from gaining heat during the day, which is the opposite of what you want. You need the water. Mistake 2 is applying it too late. If you're working in the garden after dark, you're too late for meaningful thermal transfer to happen before the temperature floor arrives. Mistake 3 is covering the plant crown. You want the root zone protected, not the stem packed in wet material that can introduce disease pressure or prevent air circulation. Work around the plant, not over it. Mistake 4 is expecting it to substitute for other late-season practices. This method is one piece of a resilient planting system. It works best with plants that are hardened off, planted in healthy soil, and watered appropriately through the season. It's not a rescue for stressed transplants dropped directly from a greenhouse into a cold bed. There's one more thing the oldest practitioners of this method do that I didn't figure out until much later, and I want to share it because it changes the way you think about your whole planting schedule. They don't rely on the evening forecast. They watch soil temperature. There are no apps for this, no alerts, no notifications. They push a finger into the ground in the morning and again in the evening, and they know from long observation what their particular soil does overnight based on how it feels at 4 in the afternoon. This sounds imprecise until you've done it for a few seasons, and then it feels like reading a language. Cold, dry soil loses heat fast. Moist, loamy soil holds it. Compacted clay holds it differently than raised bed mix. Once you know your soil, you start to know your risk, not from a weather website, but from the ground itself. That's a different relationship with your garden than most of us were taught to have. It's slower to develop, but it makes you accurate in a way that no forecast can replicate for your specific microclimate. I'd rather you start with honest expectations than oversell this. You're going to have to do it a few times before it feels natural. The first time, you'll probably second-guess yourself, standing in the afternoon sun with a bucket of wet straw, feeling slightly ridiculous. The second time, you'll do it faster. By the third time, it'll be part of how you move through the garden in early spring, the same way checking soil moisture or pulling early weeds is part of it. And the morning after your first hard frost where your plants come through unmarked, you'll understand exactly why the people who have been doing this for 6 or 7 generations never felt the need to explain it. It's just obvious. Once you've seen it work, you can't imagine doing it any other way. If this kind of practical, no-cost approach to gardening is what you're after, there's more where this came from. Subscribe, and I'll keep it coming.